Hello, it's fantastic to be with you today, albeit this is a recording. Due to prior engagements, I couldn't make it today, but I was very keen that I would record this for you. My name is Paidi O'Reilly. The topic is design fiction, which I've no doubt could be very useful to the challenges you have in front of you in terms of the global design challenge. What is design fiction? I suppose very briefly, it's a form of speculative storytelling. Okay, so what we do is essentially use stories to create this future, near future world. We can then place innovations within that story. So that could be products, services, processes, whatever. And then what we can do is we can gauge the reaction of ourselves and others to those stories. So what we're really doing is evaluating a future vision without having to build it physically or even digitally in advance. And we can be informed by how people react to those speculative stories. Um, so I, like my colleagues, work out of University College Cork. I co-direct a programme, Innovation Through Design Thinking, with Dr. Fiona Chambers, also Dr. Brian Supple lectures on that same programme, and I'm sure you'll come across others that are also involved in the programme. I also chair the Digital Transformation Lab in University College Cork, which is a network, a peer network for sharing insights about digital transformation. I have about, what is it, 28 years now, I think, experience working in the innovation space. So just to, I suppose, and I'm also conscious that I don't have much time, but I suppose one of the biggest obstacles really that holds people back in terms of innovation is really the ambition they go in to that effort with. Okay, so a lot of us, the ambition is maybe less than it could be. And it's probably no wonder then we probably end up with innovations that are less radical. And I know this event, this challenge is very much asking us to be more radical in our thinking. So if we've been more radical, then we've been more ambitious in terms of how we go about it. And I think one of the biggest challenges is literally getting outside of our own heads. Okay, very often, depending on who we are, maybe where we were born, whether it's in a certain country, region, community, family, where we were educated, where we work, it shapes the way we think. And very often it constrains the way we think. The norms constrain the way we think. So what we have to do is very often try and get beyond that and literally think outside the box. But what we also have is this ability to create the future. The future is not preordained. It's not something that happens to us. It's something that we can be part creator of. We can be co-creator of the future. But again, if we're bringing a lot of baggage from the past into that design, then of course the future is very likely to be very similar to what today looks like for all of us. And that, I suppose, introduces this diagram, which I really like, that if we keep on doing what we do today and we keep on thinking the way we think, keep on behaving the way we keep on feeling the way we feel, then we're likely to sleepwalk our way to a default future that probably doesn't look much different to what today looks like. On the other hand, if we can escape that, and sometimes we call this escape velocity, can we get beyond the draw of the status quo, then we can create these potential futures. And there isn't just one future. I think there's different possibilities for the future, but also the way we experience the future can be very, very different. How it's experienced maybe by one community can be very different to how it might be I suppose, experienced by another community. So there is no one future. It's not static. As I said earlier, it's not preordained. It's generally not a continuation of the present. Okay, it cannot be really predicted, but we can go some way towards design it. And that really brings me to this, I suppose, saying that if we want tomorrow to be different, then we have to start doing different things today. There's no point continuing doing what we do today if we want the future to be different. And that brings this saying, though, do being, that we need to start do and be today if we want the future to be different. And look, there's lots of reasons now to believe the future does need to be different, that it isn't just about surviving any longer. It's about changing really the hymn sheet, getting beyond the current hymn sheet, and about thriving. And the likes of John Elkington, etc., really talks about the triple bottom line, that we now need to align ourselves with greater purpose, with the needs of people, the needs of the planet, and not just chasing profit. So again, I think that ties in very nicely with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I know are very important to this global design challenge. But the only way we can do that is not by picking what we've been doing before, either this or that, or even combining what we've done in the present or the past. It's by a new way of thinking, what if thinking, which goes beyond the status quo. What if we were to? What if we were to try something else? What if we were to become something else? What if we were to think differently? So it's that what if thinking. So the future really is the land of the possible, and if we lean on maybe some of the authors in the science fiction space, like the likes of H.G. Wells, we've some really interesting, I suppose, perspectives. One really is design shouldn't focus on the world as it is, and there's no reason the world needs to be continuing as it is. But in order, I suppose, to go beyond where it is, then there's a role for imagination. And that imagination needs to drive future possibilities and the realization of those possibilities. So design should be future-based. We generally, if we try and design for today, by the time we've rolled out, there's a very high chance that it's not going to be the most effective, efficient, relevant solution to what we're doing today. So we should always be designing for the future. And I love this saying from H.G. Wells, that we all have these inbuilt time machines. We have memory, which can bring us back to the past, but we have imagination and dreams that can bring us to the future. And really, design needs to be using both. It needs to be informed by the past and present, but it must aspire to a future. And so for me, designs are fictions. They're possibilities. They're things that we could build to create a better future. And I think, and I know some of my colleagues would share this, design thinking really needs to be more future oriented. It needs to be more collective. It needs to be more driven by imagination of possible fictional worlds. And that then brings us to this concept of design fiction, which really design fiction is speculative storytelling about how the future will or might unfold, and the role that technologies or innovations will play in that role. And it's really where the reality of society, communities, organizations comes into contact with science and the possibility of science and the possibility of technology. And I suppose the only thing that can really play that out is a role for imagination, imagining these future stories. So what are the benefits of these fictional prototypes? And what I mean by fictional prototypes here is if we create these fictional worlds, we can create prototypes within the worlds, within the stories. Okay, so we may not have, I suppose, the means for creating these prototypes at the moment, physical prototypes, digital, but we can still create them within the story worlds and see if they look like the right type of product, the right type of solution to build. So what are some of the advantages, benefits of fictional prototyping? It's about really rousing the imagination, where we imagine better futures. So in other words, we're collectively trying to envision those futures. We're also able to reflect on them, because sometimes we're moving towards a future that none of us want. So why not reflect on it now and start to share an alternative vision of what that future might be. And let's motivate ourselves to start moving towards a better vision of the future. And we can do that through prototyping these futures, these products, these services within these stories that can then motivate us to move towards those and that better future. So this is, I suppose, this idea of a story world, so design fiction is speculative storytelling, but what we're doing is creating this story world. So because it's a story world, then what we have to do is I suppose, just adhere to a number of steps or principles. First, we have to have a clear purpose. Why are we doing this? Secondly, we create a structure, which is a plot, maybe some plot based in the future, the near future, because science fiction maybe is 20, 30, 40 years in the future. Design fiction tends to be maybe a number of years into the future. So science fiction is well into the future. Design fiction is near, what we call near future. But we create a plot in that near future. Maybe we explain a context, a situation, we explain the characters within it, what's happening within it. So we're developing a plot. The third step then is making sure that we remain grounded, that it appears realistic, even though it's based in the future. It's still based on maybe science and technology, where science and technology are going. And finally, we then present the story to others as a series of acts, and I'll come back to that shortly. So to be able to design and evaluate this future design, we need to know who does it involve, where are they, when is this? So you might start to explain who the characters are, what date in the future it's happening, where it's happening, and maybe some of that background. So who are these future personas? Who are these characters that you're trying to make a difference for? Well, what we're now trying to do is tell the story, maybe even through their eyes, or possibly it's about them at least. It's their story. We invite, I suppose, others then to nearly join them in that story. So the listener is nearly transported into that story with us as we start to tell the story of the struggles of those personas and the unrealized dreams or ambitions of those personas. We can then suggest, that there's a possibility of a better future if we were able to put some innovation into the hands of these personas in their world. So we describe what that is, and we describe what difference it seems to be making to them. Now, by imagining this future, and a future that contains these innovations, then we're one step towards being able to create that future, which becomes then maybe a shared future. It's something that we want to be part of. We want to make a difference. And obviously, the Global Design Challenge is all about making a difference. And there's, I suppose, it definitely focuses in on diversity, inclusion, equality. Who are we trying to make this difference for? What situation are they in? Who are they? Where are they? When is this happening? Now, let's tell the story of being able to put some sort of innovation into the hands of those personas, and let's tell the story of how that works out. So when we're telling these stories, and these are just sort of, I suppose, they're maybe a shortcut way of trying to trigger that storytelling within your team. Maybe the first act is about where it's, the equivalent of Once Upon a Time, where you introduce the context, the main characters, where it's happening, when it's happening, etc. The second act then is about this, I suppose, this event that's triggering a less than desirable situation. Okay, and we're telling about the ramifications of that event, how it's making people feel, etc. In the third act, then we say, that they're trying maybe to solve this problem. They've tried maybe the existing ways of addressing this issue with the same outcome, and maybe even an outcome that's deteriorating, getting worse and worse. But then we move and we turn the corner and say, look, there's a possibility of this new innovation making a difference, and we start describing it. And then we start describing what difference in Act 5 that may be having on those personas, on the situation. And Act 6 then is the end of the story, where we talk about, the live happily ever after thing, how things worked out subsequently. So when we're telling these stories and people are listening, it's as if they're being transported into the story. They become part of the story, but we're always looking for their reaction and our own reactions to that story. What are we learning about the innovation or the technology in this case that we're proposing? What did we learn, by seeing people's response to that story and to that innovation? Is there some indications of how we could improve that innovation from people's reaction to it? And what would we need to do in order to improve it? Okay, so there are some nice triggering questions, that as people are listening, these are the types of questions we can asking them and also ourselves. So look, we've used this fairly extensively in different design teams, and I just want to give a very quick sort of rundown of some of our experiences with it. I suppose the one thing it tries to do is have the difficult discussions early. It's trying to provoke a response earlier. It's looking for people's reaction, where you say, what if we were to do this? And in a way, it's trying to have the difficult discussions earlier by putting the whole thing in front of people earlier. The alternative is that we don't have those difficult discussions, and we end up, I suppose, trying to, with the lowest common denominator, things that maybe are easy to deliver rather than being important to the personas, the people we want to make a difference. And this particular example here is from the healthcare space, hence the reference to patients, etc. And what I had to do was with pregnancy. So what we were doing here was reframing the stories that were happening within the design team, so that they were not about the individuals in the design team. They became about the people who were trying to make a difference for. In this case, pregnant women that had a threat of hypertension during pregnancy. So our main stories now became the stories of these women in the story world, where they were under incredible pressure. Things weren't going well during the pregnancy, and all of a sudden we could look at what would happen if we put different innovations into that story world. What could be different? What might be different? And this is really about using storytelling to be able to shift time, space, and identity. So even with maybe the design teams for the global challenge, what we're doing is we're here now, but we're designing for some point in the future. Sometimes the design team can't even share the same physical space because they're working remotely, and could come from many different identities, background. But what we can do with this speculative storytelling is we can transport ourselves into a different space, so away from our own situation. And it's a space really where we can tell the story, a future-based story about different people in a different space, having a different identity to us. And in a way, this allows us to maybe put some of our own assumptions, beliefs, values into the background, so that they're not necessarily directing the design or the design's decisions. And I love this quote from Asimov, your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in. So this challenging of our own assumptions, and we can do that through storytelling. So as a team, we weren't all based, as a design team, we weren't all based in the same physical space, yet we knew we could always go into this story world where we were essentially all participating nearly in the same fictional space together. It was in that story space that most of the important decisions were made in terms of how the innovation was working in the hands of different personas in different situations. And it triggered many different key decisions that were being made. So a story world is exactly what it says it is. It is the world in which our personas lived, breathed, and went about their daily activities during their pregnancies. And it was where we used to join them when we were making key decisions. So we made our design decisions as we watched our fictional personas use the yet to be created connected health app in this situation. And we saw lots of issues with that app in these story worlds ever before we went to actually create it. Issues with accessibility, issues with color blindness, etc., were all things that played out within this story world. So look, I'd like to thank you for listening in. Also, I want to wish you the best with the design challenges. You'll see my contact details there if you have any questions about this as a technique. What I've done is present it in a very short period of time. But I think, look, the key thing is imagination and allowing our imagination be fired by what if questions, where we start to tell those stories and collectively tell the stories, where we're editing, changing them as we're telling them. Who is this? Who are we trying to make the difference for? Where are they? When is this? What type of solutions do they currently have that don't work well? What if we were to put this other type of solution into their hands? How does it then play out? And this is this idea of design fiction, which I think, from my own experiences, is an extremely powerful technique when it comes to design. Thank you so much, and best of luck with the day tomorrow. And also, hopefully, we'll be seeing you further along the road with the design challenge.